The program, I don't expect you to read all these numbers on the screen. We try to give them to you in paper. I know there's a lot of information on there. I'm not expecting to go through this line item by line item. But what I will point out is that we've broken this down into chunks that kind of correspond with the program diagram. The first chunk is town administration, and on the second page is school administration and school-associated things. Let's see if the back button works on this thing too. It does, great. So basically we've got town administration offices and support spaces, and then we've got schools in their support spaces, and then we have another category down at the bottom which we're calling shared spaces. And then we think there's some opportunities there for sharing some space. And that includes things like general things, coffee stations, a break room, for example, meeting spaces, larger meeting spaces, storage spaces. Those can be shared or they can be individual, and we'll touch on that as well. And then we also have a separate line down in here for cable TV. There was a question about whether or not cable TV in the studio would be included in this building or not. We've taken a shot at a kind of ballpark area so you can see what that would really mean. And then if we get into any of these things a little bit further and fine tune them, it'll all spill out down at the bottom and they all total. So we've totaled each of the departments in sections, in chunks, and then there's a subtotal down at the bottom for both the town offices, kind of net, the schools, net, and then they all total up down at the bottom, and then we have a multiplier on there, which is 35%, which takes care of things like toilets, mechanical rooms, the thickness of walls, janitor's closets, all those other incidentals, mechanical rooms, electrical rooms, things like that are kind of built into that space. And 35% we found is about right for a building of this size that we're talking about.
Is that in addition to storage, other storage in the facility?
So the storage, we try to, we don't like to include storage as part of a multiplier because, especially with town offices, you've got a lot of it. You know, you're overflowing, and storage is one of those things that we need to pay close attention to. And we've done town offices that have 10 or 20% of their overall footprint as storage, and we've done other town offices that have, it's like a full third of the square footage, net square footage in their building. It really depends on how you manage your records. If your plan is to digitize them and to come up with a program to digitize them regularly, you need enough room in each of the departments, we think, for kind of your active files. You need a little bit of place to put your inactive files in a way that you can cycle them out. You can kind of keep them moving if you're going to digitize them. And, or if you may need a larger space if you're not going to digitize them for retention. And if it's 7 years or 10 years, whatever the department is, you know, you cycle them out, you label them, and the room needs to be big enough to manage those 10 years, plus a couple of extra in case you don't get around to it every year so that you can cycle that stuff out. It really depends on where you want to go. The town that I'm talking about that wanted a full third just kept everything. That was kind of their policy. It means it's expensive space to build. And we put that in their basement, basically a 3-story building, 2 stories in a basement. The whole basement is storage and a little bit of mechanical space, but it's basically a third of their building. That's expensive space, even though it's the basement. It costs a fair amount of money to build it. So figuring out what this number is in reality, and right now that's a series of placeholders, 200 square feet per department, basically. That's a 10 by 20 row. That's not a very big space. You've got more than 200 square feet back there.
Just when we're on storage, so certainly the town clerk's office is, there's a lot of vital records that, you know, maintain historical records in some cases that are maintained for extended periods of time. I think we have records in our so-called vault, which really isn't a vault, but it's serves as one that go back to the 1800s. So, you know, that would be something that certainly needs to be in the mix here.
Yes. So I will just walk you through briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because there's a lot going on in here. What we have is each of the departments, as I mentioned, we put a number in here. We've grayed them out of basically what we've calculated. We didn't do working drawings, but we've calculated the rough square footages of the departments. so you can compare kind of where you were and where you're headed. The program totals right here are based on the worksheet portion of the building, which really happens of the program, which happens over in here. There's kind of two big groups. There's the first group is occupants, and the second group is furnishings and equipment. And basically, based on our experience, there is a certain amount of square footage that you really need in order to make an effective space. And if you look through there, what this basically means is here's your standard office, which includes a desk and one guest, and it's at about 120 square feet, or 12 by 10. That's about the minimum that you want to go for an office. And if you put a number 1 in there, it will calculate this number 1 times 120 and give us a total over there. To that 120 square feet, you can add all the additional things that you have in there. There's a square footage amount in there for an additional guest chair. There's a square foot amount in there for a credenza or a conference table, a closet space, file cabinets, and so forth. And then that all totals up down at the end, and then they both total up here back in this line item. So this is really just a guide, and we want to talk to you all about it a little bit. And the guide really informs what goes on in the program diagram. So the program diagram now includes all the square footages and equipment and furnishings that are shown in the written program. So if you go through and you traverse through all of these things, extra guest chair, meeting space, conference table for 4 in an office, an extra guest chair, the numbers of file cabinets and so forth, those all are represented in each of these things, and we've tried to color code them. We've broken them down by department, and so we've got the town manager, or the town management suite right here, we're calling it, which is that collection of spaces. And we're showing it here rather than exploded. It's kind of grouped together, just so you can kind of see where the adjacencies are. We're not suggesting that this is the floor plan, but just so that you can see where the adjacencies are. So there's a couple of different offices or spaces within that suite, for example, and some of these spaces might have walls around them, such as the manager's office, and others might not. That's one of those things that we need to touch on. We've also taken a shot a little bit at some of the adjacencies, and so what you can see here is that the town offices kind of circle around here, the school is kind of down at the other end, and then in the center, we've got shared spaces like meeting spaces. This kind of pale purple or indigo color here are meeting spaces for the most part. One of the things that we've done is we've tried to identify spaces that each of the departments might need, but we have not yet tried to combine those spaces into double duty for different departments. For example, you mentioned vault, and so the town clerk has a vault. Based on the amount of storage and so forth that the clerk has and planning for the future, we're looking at a 400 square foot vault. That's a plug at this point. That's a placeholder. Now, in addition to the town clerk, the assessor and the treasurer collector also have some material in that vault. We just plug the same number in for both of those departments. Now, they could have their own vault. They could continue to share the vault with the town clerk, or we've even done a large vault that's 6-hour rated that is subdivided inside and has multiple doors on it. There's different ways to skin a cat, but right now, that's just a placeholder and it's shown in each of the departments. And so one of the things that we need to touch on is just how much room do you need for the clerk and the other departments that are going to use the vault, and what's the best way to do that, whether they should share it, different access, or whether we're going to have different vaults. Now, it's going to be more cost-effective to do it in one, but there are implications, obviously. If you do a multi-story building and the vault is on the upper floor, you really need a vault down below it to hold it up, and so you end up with 2 for 1. You basically need to build a foundation under it to hold it up, and so you're basically building 2 vaults. You really have to just pay for the extra door. Those are the things that we can get into when we get into the schematic design a little bit more, but those are some of the implications that could be built in depending on where we're ending up. So the things that we can kind of fine-tune a little bit more is such as the size of the vault. We could probably have discussions with the folks that use that in a little bit more detail. We talked to you, Mr. Manager, about it, about the best way to manage that. Or you all all could tell us what you think the best way to do that is, in terms of cost effectiveness and so forth.
So how much analysis have you done on the storage areas that are currently in use right now?
We,
I think the town manager should probably, it's kind of looking at all this whole historical records along with, regular day-to-day records at the clerk's office.
we think that with compact storage, compact shelving in there, so shelving that moves around and basically there's one aisle, right? And you can crank it open and compact the shelving in there. If you put that on the ground floor, it's pretty cost effective to do it. We think a single vault of 400 square feet is probably going to have everything that you need for the town clerk. The question really is whether or not the storage for the assessor and for the treasurer collector that's in that vault right now, whether that should stay in the vault, whether that should go into a separate vault, or whether it really needs to be in a vault or it should just be in a fire-rated room. That's a question based on your policy and what and the critical records rules from the Secretary of State. It depends on what you're keeping and what you're putting in there. I think you probably do need some room in your vault for both of those departments in addition to the clerk, but it's fine-tuning how much you really need in there. There's a fair amount in there right now from the assessor. Yes, yes. Now, a 6-hour rated fire vault is what's required by the state. And the state also says that if you have electronic media and you keep them inside your 6-hour vault, your 6-hour vault will prevent the paper from being damaged in a fire up to for 6 hours, right? So the paper in there won't get hot enough to ignite. But that doesn't mean that electronic media won't be in danger. And so in addition to your vault, inside your vault, you should have a heat-proof container, and you don't have one now, is the reason I'm pointing this out, for your electronic media, and that should go inside a heat-proof container inside the vault to protect that as well. Because if you do have a fire, well, you don't really have a 6-hour rated vault in there. I think you've alluded to that. It's as good as you could in a building like this, but a 6-hour rated vault will protect the paper goods, not necessarily electronic stuff long term. So we'll have that. We'll do that for both, but I mean, really what you need is a piece of equipment that goes in there.
So you put a Halon system in the vault?
Halon systems are complicated because they work by eliminating the oxygen. Fire departments don't like them because they can't breathe. So they become really tricky. It's been a long time since we've done a Halon system anywhere for that reason. But 6-hour rated vault we're not worried about fire inside the vault. The idea of a 6-hour vault, the way it's designed basically is that the building, even though the building that we're talking about and that we're all imagining in our heads, is probably going to be a combustible, non-combustible construction. It's going to be mostly steel and drywall, and it's not going to be made out of wood. But the idea is that a building like this could burn down around it, and that box of concrete would stay in the middle and the paper would be okay. It could.
Yeah, 6 hour fire would be a total loss.
Yes, that's right. If we couldn't get it under control in 6 hours, that would be bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
You got bigger problems.
Yeah.
Fire department, you can't get it 6 hours.
Big problems. Yeah. So it will have its own climate control. It'll have a sprinkler pipe inside it. There won't be any penetrations in the roof. Everything will come through the sides. It'll comply with all the rules. Don't think you need 1,200 square feet of vault space. Like I said, it's a plug. It's a placeholder. Think somewhere in the 400 to 600 foot range total for all 3 departments is probably fine, but it probably means a closer, more focused conversation with each of those departments about what their needs are, because we're building it for now and for the future. Critical records don't go away, and so you need to make sure that you have room for now and for the future.
Your historical records, though, the climate control, that is a big deal. So, I mean, I did a run for the Bellwood records, which was 1620 to 1685. And it's not only about dehumidifying and providing air, it's also adding humidity. So on those cold winter days where there's no humidity, you gotta add humidity to keep it at the same humidity level all year long. That's what preserves the record. I mean, we'll have to figure out, what to do with those historical records and how many there are.
will certainly have an impact on the size. Yep. We have planned basically for, and that's a good point. The question was, what have we done about future growth? And some of the departments that we talked to pointed out that there is a future procurement position, for example, with the town manager's office. That's not a position that's in there right now. We've put some square footage in for it. So where folks told us about it when we were moving around in the spaces, we have planned for it. Paul let us know that there was a couple of, transportation was one of them. I'm going from memory now. There's a couple of spots that may want to be included for the future, at least for consideration right now, and we've included those in the program at this point. And if we decide we're going to pull them out at a later date, we could certainly do that. But for each of the departments, we have not, for example, gone in and added an extra desk in each department. Sure. That's exactly the type of feedback that we'd like to get. So we've done some kind of initial study. We're trying to make sure that we cover everything that's in the departments now, and you can see when we take, basically the stuff that's in each of the departments now is shown, and we've got a little bit of extra space kind of built in there. You can see some open space in each of these diagrams. We try to build a little extra space into each of these, but if you really are going to have another position or two in some departments, we'd like to hear that. For example, when we went into the health and building department, we asked, do you think this department will stay together for the foreseeable future, or will you split up? In other words, are you in a room right now because classroom 7 or classroom 8, wherever they are, is the only room that was available? And they said no, they think they belong together. And so we have left them together in the program. Those are the kind of things that we'd like to hear from you all.
So this is a great schematic, it's a great document that you laid out just about everything, and I understand that you kind of want to tweak square footage for placeholders.
Yep, right.
But you know, I wouldn't presume to speak, you know, for the town engineer or planning and conservation people. To what extent have you guys made an effort to sit down with these managers and talk about their own departments and what their needs are? I don't know what their needs are.
One of the things that we'd like to ask you is how you'd like us to do that. Some folks, they want everything to come through the committee, and in other folks, they would like us, other communities, they'd like us to go out, talk to these folks, gather the information, and then bring it back to you all, and we're happy to do that.
It just makes sense to me that these are the people that have skin in the game.
Yep.
And I'll refer to the town manager and chairman as to.
No, that's understandable also, but asking some of these departments, being one of them, I know what the also ideas I would like to have, but of course, it's not practical. All the time, and just we look pretty good.
I just want to make sure that that was
No, I think
Sure.
that's exactly right. I think we have to incorporate a little bit of both here. I think this committee has to look at and determine what's practical and what's not. And then we have to get a lot of input from each individual department.
So,
And these department heads may also have insight into technology that's coming down the pipe.
Yep.
It may increase or decrease in the staff.
yep.
And these are things that we need to consider, and these are the people who know what's coming down and what they may be bringing up.
And
Sure.
good point, future growth.
We,
Did you look at departments that are not one of the schools?
the ones that we were notified of, yes. For example, there's cable TV in here now. Transportation was added to schools. There was a couple of little things like that. We haven't added anything else.
I think the thought at this point is to keep DPW, with the exception of engineering, you know, in a separate space, over, closer to the operations there. Prior to COVID, how was the foot traffic through Watertown? Prior to COVID?
like saying, we'll put the police chief and the fire chief over here away from their facility. You know, I don't see that as well. You know, so I would agree with the water and sewer being as it is. I guess my question is, does it make more sense to have the building inspector and the, over in with the town engineer portion rather than with the public health? It seems to me that the building inspector and the zoning enforcement makes more sense being with the town engineer, but that's just me. It doesn't, you know, however it's laid out, it's laid out. And then the other question I have on storage, again, not that I wanna keep going back to that, the big, huge blue area storage that you have,
Yep.
is that controlled as well? You said these others will be controlled by,
Yes, probably not to the same
Community.
extent.
okay.
It won't have its own independent system,
Climate
but it will be
control.
climate controlled, yeah.
But that's my question on that. Should that building inspector be with the engineering? section?
I don't think so necessarily. I guess one of the things, quite frankly, and this is more a vision than it is anything in particular, but I think it's quite possible in the future, and this will be perhaps some time down the line, that as is the case in many communities of our size, there is a director of community development, and under that person includes planning, conservation, inspectional services, health. So I think it makes sense to have those offices all in the same general area.
Mhm.
You know, in terms of whether it's necessary to have a building with the engineer. From my experience, the most frequent contact tends to be between the planning and conservation director and the engineering and the engineer, town engineer. I mean, it's not to say there isn't contact with the building inspector, but they tend to have the most frequent contact on a, you know, day-to-day basis.
The good news on all of this is that when we go to do adjacencies, these little squares can be moved around.
Mhm.
You know, when we get to the site, you're gonna see an ugly square box.
Right.
And none of you are gonna think the town hall is an ugly square box, but it's just representing, I don't mean to do an ugly square box. It's representing the amount of space, so you know, a lot of what you're saying can be accommodated, even though it's not in that particular colored box. Like, you know, Selectman Kyra's want to have this next to that is certainly easily done, especially if we end up going like an open office and not having individual offices. So, you know, you might end up having one counter and one shop stopping by the time we're done. You know, you go, you know, a lot of times it's now one-stop shopping, you go in
Right.
and your plans go through Concom, they go through fire, they go
So I won't bore you with each of these individual things, but suffice it to say that the idea here is planning, conservation suite, and a planning director's office. Each of the offices, I will point out, has a small meeting table in it for 4. And the reason we've done that is for the most part, the only folks that asked for that were schools. And one of those conversations that we'll have to have is, does everybody have the same size office? And I've spent a fair amount of time on it. The reason I asked the question, does everybody have to have the same size office, or should their office suit their needs? So each of these offices that we're showing now has a table for 4 in it, because there's a half a dozen or so departments that have asked for that specifically. And obviously the idea there is that you could have a small meeting in that office without having to leave the department and using one of the conference rooms. And for some, I think that makes sense. School department, it makes all the sense in the world. Lots of private conversations. A teacher comes in, or a parent comes in, or a student comes in. You need to be able to have that. And that makes a lot of sense. I don't know that there is many private, personal conversations that happen in town offices as they do in schools. And so I'm not sure that's as important. Some of the departments, it does make sense that the town manager's office has a conference area built into it. That's the way you're working right now. I'd say in our experience, it's about half of them have exactly that same thing. Most other departments probably don't. So the way they're shown right now is parity. And the question is, do we really need to do that? Putting the town accountant in the same size room as the building inspector with flat files and a big table to lay out drawings and so forth doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if it's going to create an argument or a problem, we want to make sure that we touch on that. It's one of the things that's kind of driving the overall sizes of these offices now. And
Yeah, I guess I don't know if it's a conversation for now or maybe follow-up. I'd be interested in knowing the particular offices that are all the same size with the conference, with the table before. Is that what's listed here?
we've pretty much done that in all of them.
Okay.
And I don't know that, based on what we've heard, you don't really need it. And so I'm recommending that you tell me that it's okay to have different size offices for different size departments depending on what they do. To design a space that suits the needs of that department, not the person that works there, but that suits the needs of that department is what makes the most sense to us. But we want to make sure that that's okay with you.
It seems to me that there needs to be a balance here between people may need to have, as is the case now, may need to have meetings, just for sake of argument, the finance director, and they use a small conference room, which is, as you head in the front door, the first door on the first office on the right. So I think if there's small office space, small meeting spaces
can tell you what we're thinking. We have put together a questionnaire, and we try to keep it general, and we could share it with you all, or whoever you'd like us to. If you say, share it with Paul and Jeff, we could do that, and people can kind of take a look at it. And the idea is, we try to keep it general, send it out to each of the department heads, they could fill it out, and then we could, that way it kind of gets them thinking of the questions that we're gonna answer, and then we can go meet with them all. We can solicit that information from them, put it all together. We're happy to do that. Some
think
folks
that-
want, like I said, everything to come through the committee.
I think it's a good idea, but, I mean, truthfully, one of the reasons why we hired your firm is you've done this before. You know, you kind of help us, guide us through it with our OPM, and we're gonna look for the guidance. We have not designed a town hall yet,
Yep.
but, of course, we're gonna use our department heads and all the input we can get, but that's kind of what, we're looking for. So if you can put something together that we can, to help as a template, maybe,
Yeah.
to.
And the idea is to try to get information on what they see for future growth, how they use their office and department, what other spaces they use and want to be adjacent to, how often they have meetings and how big they are. That's a big one, because it helps us determine what's the right size for the type of, and we have some plugs in there right now. What's the right size meeting room or conference room for the regular meetings you have, and how often do you have it? In other words, if there's 4 departments that have regular meetings once a week in a room that holds 10 to 12 people, we're gonna need a couple of those in order to support all the spaces, so that everybody has enough
Right.
place to go, and you don't end up in a room like this.
Like, I don't need a table of 4 seats. I can use 2 chairs to speak to employees and have a discussion.
And that's what you would typically see in an office. Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Paul, did you wanna?
Yeah, just as, when we walked around with the schools, we're kind of spread out with what would normally be in the school admin building. So in our discussion, we showed them the current locations and then who we thought belonged in a centralized school administration building. But during the discussion, we had said we need to really get the right people in the room from the school perspective. The superintendent needs to weigh in on this. I mean, I can't, in fairness, make decisions on what's there. So what his vision is, there's probably 4 or 5 people from the schools that could get in a room with you, as we had discussed, and kind of bang out the school requirements, if you will.
Probably, right?
Yeah, because there's some, for instance, you mentioned transportation, that was on a document, we may say, no, we're not gonna bring transportation in there, the superintendent has to, decide, no, we don't need to bring it. The current location that department's in works fine. There might be some other ones that we say the same thing. But we're not there yet, we need to have that meeting and kind of have a discussion on it. So there might be some positions, as you have here, which are fine, that are gonna come out, and there might be something that gets added and so forth. And then from a storage perspective, you saw, especially as student support services area, there's a lot of records that are kept for 7 years and so forth. And, we have a lot of families coming to that department regularly. So I think when we left it, that we need to have a questionnaire or something, then we'd have to sit down with the 4 or 5 people and just kind of hash out what we're
But this will be helpful for you to have at least a baseline to start
Oh,
talking
yeah.
about it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? You can add and take away, and I expect we're gonna be doing that with all of them.
Yeah, like, I just want your permission to go do it. If you think it's a
Right.
good idea,
Yeah,
that's what we'll do.
I think the questionnaire is a worthwhile effort. I guess I'd like to, once the information comes back from departments, maybe we should, just, you and Dan and George and I, at least preliminarily go through what the results were and, can have some,
No hot tubs.
Help us,
reality checks, I guess.
help us filter it a little bit.
Yeah.
Cross that.
Maybe, I like the idea of the survey, and maybe without planting the seed, just like open-ended questions on the survey, and see how many of these boxes get checked off. And it's just my opinion, without showing the graphical representation of it, because this is utopia. And, everybody's gonna have a conference room, and maybe that's not gonna be the case, that's not realistic. But survey where they tell you.
Good
I
question.
remember we did a survey for the master plan, right?
We did.
Yeah.
We did.
So there was a ton of data from the master plan, and You know, what they came up with is relatively similar to what the master plan came up with. Same with the senior center,
Right.
if you think about it.
Right.
They both came up pretty close to your master plan. So, I mean, I think, you know, I like the idea of doing the survey too, because you probably have employees that have changed, you probably have had processes that have changed since you did that too.
Right.
I mean, I don't even want to know what your COVID, I just feel bad for you every time I see you.
But I think to the manager's point, something that we want to sit down and take a look at.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree.
In regard to the office space where you have a table with 4 chairs around it as a sort of a mini little conference room for that director of that particular department, and going on with the town manager said, we may not need that because there are smaller conference rooms. I guess my question then to you would be, for me, in working where I work, it's good that I have a small little area where people come in that I can talk to. And then I have my work set up right there. So if I need something on the computer, it's right there, right in that small little room where 4 people are. So if you're going to eliminate that and just go to a small conference room, as the town manager said, where they don't need that, are you going to have a setup so that that individual will be able to have their work material there on a system or on a computer, rather than having to go back and forth and say, I'll be right back, I have to go to my office and get that information. Whereas if you have that space for them to have 4 people in, you don't have to do that. They're right there in their office, and they can get that information, rather than having to bounce back
I
and
would
forth.
think that would be a case-by-case spot. So like you said, your office, that's convenient. But for myself, where I don't interact that often, you know, so I just have 2 people in.
Well, that's what I'm saying, George.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
why these directors will be able to tell you, you know, whether they need that or not. And if they say they don't need it, and then all of a sudden, 3 months down the
Makes
line, they
sense.
need it,
Yeah.
and now they go to a small conference room, are they going to be able to access their work information?
I'll tell you, our standard, and we're kind of jumping the gun a little bit here in terms of the design of the space, but our typical conference room, large or small, in a town office would be enough room for table and chairs. Larger rooms, we typically have a place where you can set a coffee pot or some handhelds or something like that. We would have an outlet on the wall that would support a flat screen television, and we'd have power and data in that room. So you could go in there with your laptop, plug in, and be able to talk to somebody and show things on the television if you decided to put a TV in there.
And grab your files from the server.
If you're on the network, you can certainly get to your files from there as well.
No, I was just going to say that I think the survey is a great idea. And I know some are probably going to ask for more than necessary. But I think what might come out of it is probably what you want to know is, okay, you have your office here, and then you also have to have public meetings, for example, like the planning department, okay? So you would ask them, what is deficient? What are your problems not having, where you have to have these public meetings and the director has to be there? What do you need for that meeting? And I think they're going to be the best ones to tell you that information. So, will everybody have a table with 4 chairs in it? Maybe not. But I totally agree with that questionnaire. I think it's a starting point, for you to get a feel for some of the needs. And they may also say, I have this space, but it's really wasted and it can't be used because I don't have the privacy that I need, or something like that.
We've gotten a lot of that feedback just walking around in both of the buildings. People were very willing to share.
Yeah.
Satisfied with it, the walls and stop here, and then you can hear everything everybody says. We got a lot of that.
Yeah.
Some folks are more forthcoming than others. Some we spent 20 minutes with, others we spent 10 minutes with. There was one department that we talked for, I don't know, half an hour, maybe 40 minutes.
Would,
Right.
We got a lot of good feedback. We try to get all that in here as best we could.
John?
Would the survey include what type of, like, first floor be for the high-traffic departments, like open concept, like Dan had brought up?
We
Just one large counter, and, you know, people can pay their bills and go to the building department?
Yes.
You know, and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Have you considered that? for here?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it does make sense if you're looking at a multi-story building, to
Yeah.
have the departments that get the most traffic,
Yep.
have them on the first floor, make them accessible, consider the adjacency as well as how convenient it is for people to get there.
And that's what you want.
Some folks come to town meeting just to pay their bills, right? They wanna pay their bills in person, they don't
Yeah.
wanna mail it in, they don't wanna drop it, they wanna come here.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure that we take that into consideration. It's pretty standard for town offices. There's
Yeah.
gonna be some departments, I'm sure the schools as well.
Survey's okay?
Yes.
All right, so we all kind of agree a survey's okay.
And I think I'm also hearing that not everybody has to have the same size office. I think I'm hearing
Can we
that.
get a copy of the survey before it goes out? to take a look
Yes,
at?
yes.
Thank you.
Just a question about the growth factor. Is there, you know, we talked about the expectation that there will be some level of growth that will happen in this joint admin building over the next 50 years. When you do these kind of projects, is there some kind of a baseline percentage, or, you know, certainly when you're designing a school, you look at 10 years of enrollment and where the trend is running, and that's kind of the basis for figuring out what your future space needs are, but how do you gauge that in a municipal admin building?
Elena and I, when we were here, actually asked everybody who would listen whether or not you've done a build-out study in town, either specifically for build-out reasons or for tax purposes or any other. We talked to the planning department, we talked to assessors, we talked to a variety of departments to see. It sounds like you haven't done a build-out study.
No.
A build-out study, for those who don't know, is when is the point in the future where you see that you are essentially built out, when all the housing units that you kind of expect will show up in town, Gives you an idea about where your population will kind of plateau. And if that build-out study shows that that's 100 years from now, well, there's no real good way to plan for that in a building that's going to last for 50 years or 100 years. It's a little harder to know. So, but it doesn't sound like you've done any based on that. So we'll make some, what we'll end up doing is kind of using some averages of similar communities to you to project into the future. And we'll run those numbers by you and see if those make sense to you. Because we do need a plan for the future. I think you want to plan at least for 20 years out, and we're looking at a building that is going to be durable and lasting for at least 50 years to 100. So that's the kind of building you're looking at. We want to also, when we're looking at sites, you know, we want to think about what you might do if you need to add on to this building at some point in the future.
Are we an MAPC community?
Yes.
So I'm sure they have a regional build-out study and have probably got a plug-in number for Wilmington. It might not be perfect, but it'll be enough for us to be able to project within reason. So I'll take that as an action item. All right?
What is that, Steve?
Metropolitan Area Planning Council?
Oh, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, thank you.
Jeff knew what it was, that's all it was for.
So one thing that I think that, you know, we can do with the meeting spaces, et cetera, is create adjacencies between offices that may include a small conference room rather than a four-seated table in each office, you see what I'm saying? And have adjoining doors, and just figuring out who can live with that. I'm not sure if the superintendent and the assistant superintendent could live with something like that in a conference room.
Yeah, we just have to talk through. They're not a conference room in the office. It's really, if the superintendent, has a couple parents want to come in to meet
Yeah.
in his office.
I'm just throwing that out as an example.
Yeah, we can talk, I mean, we may not all need, you know, that type of setup.
But we can
want them.
probably save on some square footage by
That
doing
makes
something.
sense, Paul, because you could, if the planning and conservation
Yeah.
work that closely with the town engineer,
Yeah,
you could put a conference
Yep.
room in between the two of them.
Yep.
Yeah,
yeah, that makes sense.
and that saves
Just,
space.
you know, efficient.
And there are some departments that need privacy for HIPAA.
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
And the HR people, like, they're gonna need privacy, and you might even see growth in that department too in the future, the way things are going now, so.
Okay, good.
All right. So the next big thing is meeting spaces. We've taken a shot at, there's the potential for the cable TV studio. We made some assumptions about the sizes. It could be that some of these spaces can overlap. You may say, for example, the cable studio is really just an open space. And one of these rooms could be set up as the cable TV studio. If you said that the majority of your public meetings that were going to be broadcast are going to go out of a large meeting room or a hearing room, for example, those could be set up with cameras mounted on the ceilings and the walls. They could potentially share a cable TV room that's associated with those, with monitors and the controls so that they can control the cameras and so forth from inside there. They wouldn't have to set up their equipment in the room. And you could broadcast from both of these rooms, for example. I think that's probably pretty standard for spaces like
Can I
this.
ask you a question on that? If in some cases, we've had meetings in here where people are outside in the hallway.
Right.
So if we had the large conference room for a large meeting, an anticipated large meeting,
Yep.
and there was an overflow, could they go into the smaller hearing room and still be able to see on a screen TV what's going on in the
Sure.
large hearing room and interact in
You
that
bet.
room, you know what I'm saying?
You just tell us to do that, and that's what we'll do.
I would also add too, with COVID, we've all gotten used to participating in Zoom meetings. And I think some people are gonna like to do that in the future. So, I think we should be planning all of these facilities so that we're supporting, the general public. If they wanna tune in to a hearing or whatnot, they can do it.
Participation,
do it
it's
online.
outside of the building or within the building.
It's coming.
Even
Yep.
if it's just
I
folks that
agree.
don't want to go out in the
I
rain
agree.
or the snow, or not able-bodied and want to participate.
And Phil, one of the things also for this, we'll say this is the Board of Selectmen's area. I
Yep.
think a kind of a media center, this is gonna be their area, maybe something that the, one night it's Board of Selectmen in there, one night it could be the school committee in there. And it'd be a little media room, so all your productions and everything are in there, something totally, so you can combine the two, so.
Similar to what we have at the
The
high
other
school.
thing too
We
is
have
on that
that
small meeting room,
media room right
committee-
next to
the
the,
committee that I'm on, it's
Right.
small, the committee
well,
I'm on
it's,
with
it's,
nine.
it's a,
Okay. It's the
what is
finance
that
committee.
called
But we
that?
It's
also
a
bring in
large
department
learning
heads,
center.
Large
Right,
meet
that's
with
where
them,
the school committee meets,
try
that's
and
where we
police
do.
chief and everything else. How big is that, how big would that
I don't
table
know that they
accommodate?
heard about that.
So this one, the question is basically how big are these rooms? This room is designed for probably about what this room would support if it wasn't full of stuff, right? About 200 people will fit in this room.
Okay.
With the Board of Selectmen or some other group or at the front. The hearing room is smaller. It probably would support, I think there's 80 chairs in there. And so, auditorium size for larger groups, potentially even, town meeting, or depends on what you typically expect, or if you do that at your high school. But most selectmen's meetings could happen in a room like that. And then we're also suggesting that there is a series of smaller rooms, conference rooms. Now, again, we've divided this by kind of schools and town, and if you tell me that this is kind of based on the room you have upstairs, where you get together and there's 20 to 25 people, that's kind of that size room there. About that size room makes a lot of sense for a variety of meetings where an 800 square foot or a 2,000 square foot room is probably too big. This is going to be a little bit more like the room that you have over here in terms of its overall size, right? And so, does each department need one? And that's really a question of how often do you have meetings and what size, so that we know whether or not we can consolidate some of these spaces or not.
So I gotta ask a question. How often do the Board of Selectmen have meetings with more than 200?
Not
Well,
that-
depends on the topic, but not.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
Yeah.
but if it was once a year, you could relocate to the auditorium at the high school or something. But 200 would be adequate, probably for every day.
That would be our
Yeah.
public hearing just before our town meeting and meetings.
Yeah, stuff like that, okay.
Right.
I just wanna make sure it's big enough, because sometimes
Sure.
they get a lot of people at every
Or
selectmen's
it's
meeting.
Well, that's
controversial
why
to
I
Kevin.
asked- Yeah, that's why I asked if the other room, if for overflow,
Right, would work.
we could use that. You would need to be able to have
You get
that.
280, you're in trouble, you
Yeah.
get something bad.
We had that much for the carnival permit, I think, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, we've had a few.
Right.
So we need a little bit more information back from the departments about, best we do, and things like lunchroom, you know, you could do one lunchroom, but we're talking about a building that's big enough that with one lunchroom, it's gonna be kind of a hike. You might wanna put, if you end up with 2 floors, you might wanna put one on each floor. Maybe it's associated with the toilets and things like that, so we get plumbing together. That's one of those things that we wanna just kinda keep our eye on. The same is true with things like a server room. You could consolidate everything in one spot, but the building is large enough that if you had 2 locations, you could connect them with a backbone, and that may make the routing to the different offices easier. We try to, I'm forgetting the number now. Our electrical engineer is gonna wanna make sure that a home run from this closet to any particular point is less than, I think, 200 feet or something. And if it gets longer than that, then you start to have some line loss, and so they may want more than one. It's just one of those things we need to kind of keep in mind. Things like this and janitor's closets and so forth, those things kind of drop off when you're doing initial schematic design drawings, and then they kind of come back in once the engineers get involved. The other thing that I will point out is that we've created a couple little, what we're calling coffee stations. And what this is instead of having to hike all the way down to a lunchroom or having to go into the bathroom to dump out your coffee, you can go someplace and get a cup of coffee to rinse out your cup without having to go all the way down to the
Like a
lunchroom.
kitchenette type.
Like a little kitchenette. It's just, I mean, the building is big enough that you want to make it convenient and easy to work with. And this is really inspired by the fact that a lot of these departments are in classrooms right now, and a lot of them have sinks that they use on a regular basis. And it's going to be kind of a hardship to pull these folks away from the sinks that they've gotten used to using. We're trying to just make it a little bit more convenient. I think it makes good sense, and it's not an expensive space. It could certainly be combined with something like your mail room, copy room, that kind of thing, and just for convenience. Because if we don't plan for it, somebody's just going to stick a Keurig somewhere, you know, like over a copy machine, and it's going to be an accident. We just want to think about it, which is why we have
Yeah,
something.
that's what they have now. I mean, to improve on efficiencies, they all don't need college buddies, they don't need microwaves and toasters and coffee makers in each and every office.
People do maintain their own budgets for office supplies, I understand, in town
Right.
offices. And so, rather than having a centralized location for storage of those materials, we've distributed it into the office spaces. So we don't have, there's no big room in here that's full of paper and envelopes. People have their own space within their departments.
That is the current situation. I'm not necessarily sure it's the most efficient situation.
Okay.
You know, I mean, quite frankly, one of the things that I've thought, you know, for some time, and it goes to the point about at some point creating a procurement position that would have responsibility for procuring, depending upon the circumstances, potentially, you know, paper products and supplies like that for school and town admin. I think there would be some savings, it would seem to me, if we had all the departments collectively doing that. I mean, as it is right now, there are certain vendors that, you know, folks are permitted to make orders from, but if you're ordering paper products, it seems to me, and I don't know, you know, maybe there's a downside here, but being able to know that you're gonna need, I don't know, 1,000 reams of paper for the building versus each office ordering 50 reams of paper or whatever would make sense, you know?
It seems like it would be more efficient, but, you know, we can't dictate the way that you do business, so, but if
Right.
you are thinking of changing, we'd love to know that. I think that the copier mail rooms would probably get a little larger in order to support that storage space that goes along with it, because I think, you know, things like paper storage and envelopes and so forth, postage machines, copiers, it all makes sense to keep them together, so you don't have to go for a hike when you need to reload the copier.
Yeah, I mean, this probably needs further discussion. I certainly don't want to be speaking for the school department, but I guess one of the things that I, in a general way, view as a benefit to a school town admin building is some of those efficiencies as well as just, if you're in the same space, it may foster, more collaboration, so.
Okay.
Okay. And the last little bit, and I think right now we've got placeholders in for storage. I think this is one of the things that's going to show up on the questionnaire for the different departments. We'd like to talk to them a little bit about what they need in terms of storage. Right now, 200 square feet for each of the departments is just what we've plugged in. We'd like to right-size that a little bit. One of the things that we do not have in here, for example, is recreation storage. They've got a lot of their sports equipment and so forth over in the arts building. We have not planned to bring that into storage here, assuming that they're out in the field and they could stop someplace on the way. But you let us know if you think it's better. I think for them to have storage for their records and paperwork and so forth makes sense. But if you'd like us to add storage for their equipment
They
as
have
well.
different facilities throughout the town where they keep equipment,
It
so
didn't seem like it needed to come here.
I would not want to have to move it back and forth when it's already out at one of the other facilities.
They have pods and things like that.
Correct, yeah, that's more efficient the way it is laid out.
You're also gonna have really efficient storage, like Phil said, you're gonna have racks on rails so that you only have one aisle open and the rest of them are stacked together. And you can wheel them down and get to the aisle you need to. You get, I think it's almost 3 times the amount of storage with the system. And as we get closer to finalizing the drawings, record retention is gonna be a subject, and I think there's 57 different record retention laws, if I remember my class is right. I mean, there's all sorts of different dates, some that you can never destroy, some that you can destroy after 3 years, some are 7 years. His records, I think you have to keep his records till the pilgrims come back, So, there's a lot of stuff, but you're gonna wanna cull some of this stuff too.
Right. All right. I don't want to bog down just on the programming. I know we have some site analysis too.
Okay. The site analysis, I'm going to start with a slide that we had in our.
How about the bathrooms?
Yes, that's all part of that 35% multiplier. I didn't put a particular slide in there that shows there. We made a little mark in there just to remind you that in addition to those, there'll be mechanical spaces and chase spaces and so forth that need to go in there.
And how are the bathrooms gonna be set up? Is it men, women, and men and women?
That's a good question. That's really up to you. We have in the past done larger gang toilets that are men and women. You walk in and there's a couple of sinks and a few fixtures in there for men and women. We have also done some, but not in the town hall, that are open to everyone. Dan's looking at me like, oh, I hate that.
No.
But we've
I'm
also-
not saying an open concept like that. I'm saying
Yeah,
Where
you
you've
have
got,
a men's room, you have a women's room, and then you have
family bathroom.
family bathroom
bathroom,
for, so.
the other thing that we've done, what we have looked at that, what we have found is the most cost-effective and easiest for folks to manage is that rather than having a series of toilets in a particular room that's labeled men and women, is to have individual toilet rooms. It doesn't cost much more, it doesn't take up a whole lot more space. Have a series of toilet rooms. In that same space, instead of having 2 toilets, you have a little corridor in the middle and a series of doors. Individual toilets, and they could just be labeled toilet. And whoever wants to go in there can go in. And if somebody needs to go in there and help somebody because they're in a wheelchair and they need assistance, they're in a private room. It checks off all the boxes.
Right.
Male, female, undetermined.
The number of fixtures is dictated by the plumbing code,
Right.
and that is still about 15 years behind the rest of the building code, so. You still have to do X
That's something
number,
we can discuss in the building.
X number male, X number female, but you can just do fixture count, so.
Which makes sense.
Okay.
So the summary from the Harriman report was the size of the existing town hall and the school, total up to be about 24, and they were projecting a total combined facility. They suggested you look at about 42,000. Right now, with multiple vaults, and maybe some doubling up on some of the meeting spaces and a table for 4 in each of the rooms, but also probably not enough storage. we're at about 39. Right, we're a little under, but we're pretty close.
Yeah.
And I would guess with some adding and subtracting, we're probably gonna end up at right around 40. In other words, this kind of makes sense. And
Just
so-
on that point, real quickly, I would like to have an opportunity to talk to Ryan Millar, the executive director at WCTV, with respect to, you had identified the square footage potential for that group, just to get his thoughts on that, I guess.
Sure, okay. That's kind of based on what's going on over at the high school, which Paul showed us. We took a look at the facilities over
Okay.
there. The square footage is kind of based on that. But again, that 300 square foot studio is a space that could probably be combined with another meeting room, and it would fulfill most of their needs. Unless it's something that they need to set up regular sets because they're doing a regular show, and need to leave things kind of as they are, in which case they probably need a separate space. It's really, like anything else, how the space is going to be used.
That could be part of the questionnaire when you come to
We could,
WCTV.
yeah, exactly, make that part of the questionnaire.
Can you clarify just one thing? We're not talking about moving WCCTV. They're still gonna have their own space, but just to be able to accommodate them here.
Well, I
Roger,
don't
so-
want to speak for them, but I think the long-term, my sense is that their long-term plan is to be able to move out of that space. They have a lease right now, I forget now what the term of that lease is, but that I believe is their longer-term
Okay.
plan.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't know the future, especially because a lot of that comes from the Comcast, Verizon, the cable TV contribute to that. And now a lot of streaming population, people are doing that, and it's not through the cable anymore. So
Right.
that's gonna affect them, I'm sure.
So just for your edification, like 300 square feet for their operation won't cut it.
Yeah.
So you might want to check them out and see what they do there.
All right.
Okay. So this slide again is a summary slide that we had in our interview. We identified the 4 sites that you've asked us to look at, and they're numbered here. School Street, Glen Road, Middlesex, and Maine. We've got these other Whitefield School, the school's not really there anymore, and the Swain School's not there. Those confuse me a little bit, so if you don't mind, I'll refer to them by the street names, so I can keep track of them. But we tried to keep them in this order, I think, in the show. The thing that we've added here is the zoning summary. All 4 sites are in the residential 20 zone. And so a summary of the zoning is 40-foot front setback and 20-foot to side and rear. We've shown that on the plans. 35-foot and 2.5 stories maximum in this zone. Municipal facilities are allowed. And there's no exact category for municipal offices in the school department. And so we picked the one that's the closest, we think, because that's what the zoning bylaw says, and that comes out to 1 parking space per 300 gross square feet. And so what I'm going to show you on each of these plans, this plan again was was the summary slide from our interview. So I haven't changed that slide at all. This is basically overall size of the site. This is the School Street site, existing senior center here, 4th of July building down there, town common kind of surrounded by residential areas. So this is the new slide that we have. So we're beginning to do site analysis here. So property line is in blue, the setbacks, 40 feet on the streets and 20 feet in the sides and rear, shown in red. The existing senior center building is there. There's that, the ugly gray box that Dan told you was coming. That represents half of the total square footage, so 21,000 square feet, assuming a 2-story building. Given the size of all of these sites and given the size, the overall size of the building, it begins to make sense to look at a multi-story building like this. You could certainly spread it out, but it's going to eat up a lot more of your footprint on the site.
And this isn't the location of the building.
Right, right. This is, yes, that's right.
I don't want you guys going out and going, oh, why do we hire these guys? Right?
This is what we call a test fit.
Yeah.
So the idea is
Just shows you that it fits on the site.
there's a box. This right here is 140 parking spaces, which is what the zoning bylaw says we need for this size building. Over here we've added an extra 90 spaces. We're trying to get an idea about what's gonna fit, because we understand that's a parking lot right now that's used by the high school. And so the question obviously is gonna be, is the parking lot gonna be large enough to support this building plus whatever you're using for at the high school? I don't know how popular this lot is for the high school.
Very
Very
It's full?
cool.
Okay. So we're gonna need to go count the spaces on that site.
Not only for that, it's when we have our town meeting, I mean, that's overflow, if we have it at the high school.
Yep.
There's a lot of events that go there, the community uses that a lot, so.
Okay. So that's how a building of the size that we're talking about approximately would fit. And there's as Dan said, there's a number of places it could go. We actually thought about the idea of kind of tucking it into the hillside a little bit, without getting too close to the existing senior center. You could kind of tuck it over into the hillside, away from the senior center. We're trying to give a little bit of space around the 4th of July building, but there's certainly other opportunities where a building could be located. You could sit it right in the middle and park all the way around it. There's a variety of things we could do. A 3-story building would have a smaller footprint. A little bit more of the overall square footage would get eaten up by stairs and elevator. Because instead of 2 sets of stairs and elevator, right, you need 3 sets. It's just more square footage. So it's one of those things, we'll have to analyze how it comes up. Basically, it's the percentage of the overall square footage. But basically, this tells us that this essentially fits on this site. Close to the town common, it kind of fronts the streets similar to some of these other buildings do. There's an opportunity to kind of set it back as well, but it kind of creates a little bit of a zone across from the common that says town center, which is kind of nice for a municipal building like this. In terms of folks that are looking for school administration, it's not far to go. It's going to be pretty easy for folks to locate this building, we think. So preliminarily, looks pretty good. No wetlands issues here. We've got a little bit of grading issue. It's about a 10-foot grade change between the front and the back of the site. But basically, as you probably all know, the lower part of the site is pretty flat, pretty easy to develop. The question there is, if we're taking over the majority of that parking lot, are we going to be able to support some additional parking there? Now, we could probably move that back a little bit and get everything that we need. The other question in our mind is, really need 140 parking spaces for a building of this size? It seems a little heavy, but that's what's in the zoning bylaw, and maybe there's a different method we could use. We'd have to talk to
Would
folks
that
about
be on slab building? Because I know that, and I forget if it was this group that I mentioned this to in a prior meeting, but there's a high water table there, because essentially where that box is now was where the old Swain School was, and WCTV used to have their operation in the basement, and I remember on several occasions, the area being flooded out, there was water coming in. I can't recall exactly to what depth, but enough so that things had to be raised up and so on. So I just think we need to be mindful of what the groundwater or the water table there.
The assumption here is that this is a 2-story, so that's the entire program. Slab on grade, elevated 2nd floor, no basement.
Okay.
You could add a basement. That's going to be another 33% of square footage. That bottom line is going to jump, and the cost is going to go up. I don't think you need the basement. The amount of space that we have in there with the 35% will allow you to get your mechanical space and everything right on grade without having to do a basement.
So basically, this is pliable site, this is a decent site.
Yeah, yep. Looks like the test fit shows that this site basically works.
Just one other thing too on the site is that with the building situated now is the green area there, and there's some consensus in town that be maintained. We have the farmer's market there on the
Sure.
weekends.
We've heard
The
that,
library has their summer celebration there Friday night. If you want to get a good look at how that space is used, come into town Friday night, and you can get a barbecue sandwich too from
All right.
one of the food trucks they're going to have there. But just so you know, that's a
We've heard
much used
that.
space.
Great. Okay.
Not for anything, and if it is that site, a lot of stuff goes on in the town common, okay? And like 4th of July building, they rent porta potties. Is there some way of having a double door set, so you have a door open, have bathrooms for the public, and another door? and
We have
another-
done that in the past, sure.
Yeah,
We've made what we call a night lobby,
Yeah.
Where you could open the outer set of doors and the inner set of doors stay locked
Yep.
and people can get access.
Yeah.
And you can either open it or not. In other words, once you make the decision, you can certainly go lock the doors.
Yep.
And you can do it
I don't
inside.
want to get too far off of the design of the building with
No, I-
bathrooms or, and access, so we're just trying to stick with the site selection as we're going through here. Thanks, John.
The second one, this is the site we're on. This is Glen Road. So we took a look at, the biggest challenge here is how do you maintain operations in this building, as well as maintain the play fields that you have on the back side of the site. Stay away from the wetlands, which happen back here. There's a brook back here, and then there's some wetlands, including what's labeled as a cranberry bog. Not sure if anybody really grew cranberries there, but I assume they did. It's pretty well wooded now, but there's a lot of lines going on in here, but assuming that the Rivers Protection Act would kick in for lubbers here, that's a 200-foot setback, which is that heavy green line, and then there's a kind of a black line that hops in and around based on the 100-foot setback for wetlands. It really only intrudes on the site down in this corner. So, actually looking pretty good. Thought maybe the wetlands would have more of an impact on the site, but they really don't, except for this front corner. So, the idea here is with the test fit is whether or not you can fit the parking spaces on there, and again, that's the 140, and the question is that really too many for the town offices? And if it is, in this case, maybe you leave it large so that you have some additional parking to support the play fields without crowding out your parking lot for town events and so forth. And also gives you the opportunity that you could construct this building while you maintain the offices here. You don't have to move out. That's, so I was encouraged to see that you could potentially do that, whether it's here or whether it's down here. You could potentially build a new building and keep this building in operation. And it would be hard for the year or so that it would take to do that, year and a half, but it probably would still function. And so this site I wasn't quite sure was going to shake out, but it looks like it would fit without having to relocate. Now, you certainly could relocate these play fields, right? You could build a building back here somewhere and take down some of the woods and redo the fields, but the way they lay out now is with the 4 ball fields and the football / I assume soccer field in the middle, it kind of works. So if we don't have to reinvent it, we don't have to, but that is another opportunity on this site. But again, it kind of, it passes on the test fit. Middlesex Ave. Again, Google Maps is still showing a building there, and it is no longer, it's gravel and a parking lot. We took a look at this site. This is one of the sites that we thought was going to be pretty easy to work on as well. And I was a little surprised. It is not. There are wetlands all around this site, including a little stream that runs through that kind of connects the 2 sides of the wetlands, so a little pond over in here. And with all the setbacks and wetlands, the whole back portion of the site is going to be hard to build on without dealing with wetlands issues. And so if you try to stay away from the wetlands issues in this stream completely, there's really no way to get to the rear part of the site without impacting the stream and the Rivers Protection Act. So the only spot in the back that you're out of the woods is kind of right there, but you can't really get to it without crossing the wetlands or that stream. So that pretty much leaves the tail in the front. And it's not as big as it looks, I guess, when you drive up there. That's the same size building, 2 stories, and the same parking area. Now, clearly, you could squeeze that parking area down and just have a driveway on one side and maybe extend it a little bit further. But, you know, we're gonna fill that site right up to the edge.
Well, we're also assuming that the wetland line is where you drew it.
This is really just based on the best information we have. And you could go out and flag that, and it could get
You
worse.
could flag it and be in trouble.
Yeah. I would guess we are pretty close to the kind of the tree line in there. We're 40, 50 feet back from the tree line, but it could be right at the tree line because it starts to get mushy in there. We walk over to the end of this dead end road in here. It's mushy in there before you get to that little dead end road. So it may be that this wetland really is a little further up than what shows on the GIS.
Not surprised.
But based on this, we're not sure that this site is really a contender for a building development of this size.
Okay.
It just doesn't seem like it's worth looking further into this. That's up to you to decide. But this one looks a little bit too tight for the size development we're talking about.
You have to deal with the soccer parents on that site too.
Yes, and try to provide enough parking that suits the building and not impact it, it's not really possible. We're in the playfield.
Yeah.
Basically, it goes away.
Yeah, if you take that soccer field
My
away,
kids are older.
Yeah, right, I didn't draw it there because it doesn't fit
yeah, yeah.
with any kind of development. It would go away.
We give the soccer parents a Xander's.
Town meeting, they're a pretty big group.
We're not recommending this site. I will leave it up to you if you decide you want to take it off the table now or not, but it doesn't look like it's going to shake it.
Okay.
And the last one, we originally looked at this portion of the site next to St. Dorothy's on Main Street. We've since learned that it also includes a series of smaller lots that run up along the side. That doesn't really help us, given the form of it. But the size of the property there is just about big enough that you could kind of squeeze that on there. You know, you'd have to take down the majority of the, this wouldn't be a wood site anymore. It'd be a little bit of the standard trees across the back, but we'd need to open up more of it in order to get into our stormwater management and so forth. There's not a whole lot of site left here. This one is almost big enough. The additional tail here will probably help us with the green coverage that we may need. It's not a requirement in the zoning bylaw to have a minimum percentage of green space on a development like this. But it certainly would be easier to manage in terms of stormwater and so forth, to have that tail if we needed it. But it would be hard, I think, to get in there and start taking the trees down and trying to get like a retention basin in there or something for stormwater. This one's a little tight, but essentially it works. Probably make this one work as well. The traffic on Main Street is a little rough. I've been to this site 3 times now, and on different times of day, but not during rush hour, so I don't really know. But it's been kind of hard to get out both of this little kind of dirt lot here, as well as get out of the St. Dorothy's parking lot. People kind of cruise along that section of Main Street. Once they get up past the lights here, they're kind of tooling right along. It's a little harder to get out. So I think traffic and the sight lines coming out of here is a little harder. It's similar like that on Middlesex. Traffic kind of buzzes along there. There's a couple more lights down there that kind of slow things down a little more. But, so this one kind of works. I wouldn't put this in the top 2.
Okay.
For this
All right,
size.
well, as you know, this committee sits on another project that we have, and we're discussing these exact same sites.
Yep.
That'll be our
And pretty much similar issues.
yeah, so we're not surprised by what we're seeing here. So we have to figure out which way we're gonna go and what's gonna fit. Is that the end of your presentation?
I think this is the last slide. It's a good segue. You just mentioned one of the things that we've been talking about is putting together a site selection matrix where we kind of go through, set up a series of questions or things that are important, and then rank them, and then how exactly we do that, and what these questions really are, and whether or not they even apply. For example, assessed value. For you, probably doesn't matter. But some of the other things, the effective and usable site areas. We've got lot size on there, that's important. But if the effective lot size really doesn't work, that's probably an important point. Traffic, as I mentioned, on a couple of these sites is a little tricky. Does that belong on here for the senior center and or for the town offices, school administration building? Yeah, it probably does. Visibility, which is also proximity to town center. It's one of those things, this is one of your important buildings. And do you want it kind of tucked away in the woods, kind of the way we are right now, or is it better on a more prominent location? Those are the kind of things that we'd like to talk to you all about and put together in a draft. And I understand that one of the ideas is to come together with the senior center design team, the
I was
OPM,
gonna get to that.
and talk about these issues together. But here's kind of where we've put this draft together without talking to you all first, and we just try to get some ideas together so that we can begin that conversation.
Yeah. So, and thanks for the segue.
Sure.
But, so the senior center, project is similar. It's obviously looking at the same 4 sites and it's come up with similar conclusions because the footprint is similar. You know, the senior center's coming in at 20,000 square feet, as a single story. So I'm glad you drew all the boxes for us. and we won't have to do them on our sites. But, you know, I think that it would be helpful if we had a joint meeting with the other committee to get all the committee members together. But prior to that meeting, if the OPM and the two designers and the chairman of both committees got together and tried to put together one matrix, so that we're not pitting one project against the other, but using one master matrix to try and rank the sites, and try and see if we can slog through it so that we all come into an agreement where each project's going. Because the last thing we want to do is have both projects pick one site, or one project doesn't want that project going to that site. And I think if we put together the matrix, it'll spell it out, because the needs of the two buildings are different. Even though the sizes are similar, the needs are different. Seniors don't do well turning onto Middlesex Avenue. That committee has already asked that the Whitfield school site, was it Whitefield? Whitfield. I did it right. The Whitfield school site be eliminated for consideration, because they just don't think that seniors can get in and
Yeah,
out.
we haven't got to that point yet, though.
No, but they were intimating it. We didn't vote it, but we were going down the path. So I think it'd be a good idea if we just set that up, and I wanted to get your gauge. They were okay with it. The other committee was okay with it. I wanted to get this committee's gauge, and if so, you know, between this meeting and the next meeting, which would be a joint meeting on just site, we could, you know, throw up the agreed upon analysis and literally go site by site, fill it in as a team.
I agree. I think we should put a matrix together. Something we can discuss, and we can have it together. That's very similar to what's there. I could put out a poll, as we have done, to see how the entire two committees, and what would be a common date that we could meet on.
Oh, I was gonna say, you're not gonna pull them on what's gonna be in the matrix, you're gonna pull them on just the schedule.
Just the schedule,
Just-
yeah.
that's
See
enough
who
of
can
that.
meet what, what's convenient for all.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
you
good.
saw what went out the last time, did that work for everybody? Yeah,
that was great.
yeah, so,
Would that methodology for the next step be acceptable to everybody?
It seems to me that we've got to work in concert with both of these projects, and that is a logical step, so I'm behind that 100%.
I think everybody has, I mean, this is nothing new to us, we've seen a lot of this, so
Yeah.
we kinda have some of it in our head already, so.
I just wanna make sure that we literally look at the sites from a datum-based matrix. You know, I don't wanna get to town meeting and someone say, you picked that site because of A. I wanna be able to say, yeah, we picked that site because it has three-phase power, it has sewer, it has the topography made the cost of the building $4 million less. I wanna be able to say those things. I wanna be able to instantly jump up, or have you guys jump up and answer those type of questions. And just voting sites is not gonna work. I mean, we really have to look at it. And then, once we're done with that, we have to study that site to make sure it works. So in the RFP for both the designer and the OPM, we're developing a site. So, and when I mean develop, I'm talking geotech, water tables, geotech, soils, everything that would be necessary, so that when we get to town meeting, we can look town meeting in the eye and say, we don't have any unknowns. And that's the goal.
Okay.
Okay?
So would you suggest using that particular matrix, or,
Well,
or enhance it in some way?
So that matrix is fine. We do a matrix, and so does the architect for the other one. And I think if we meld the three together, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. That's why I wanted the offline, the Dietz, Johnson Roberts, the chairman, and myself to just sit in a room, walk through them
Working group.
as a working group.
And then I can send that out to the board after.
Yeah,
The
you can
different
send it out to the
committees.
board, but you can't comment on it, that's an
Right.
open meeting violation.
Right.
But
You
at
can
least
see
you'll
it.
know what we're gonna be presenting at the next meeting, and before we start going through it and ranking it, you can say, yeah, you know, no, I don't agree with you that, you know, three-phase power is important, take it off. So, I mean, you'll make the decision as a double group.
And the committee will have it in front of them beforehand, just so they're informed, well-informed. And so once we have our meeting, then we can say, to his point, we don't think that's important. That's not a big factor, so. All right, so, my next thing, instead of trying to schedule a meeting here, I will send that poll out. Everyone will see it, and please respond as we go through. I'll give a bunch of different dates. I think it should be sooner than later.
And that's gonna be a double meeting. So you're gonna have to send that poll to the other committee too.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
unfortunately,
I
a
have
lot
all
of the
the
folks are the
emails.
same players, so.
Yeah, well,
Diane doesn't get 2 votes.
there's no pickleball in this one. All right, any public comment? I see we have a couple of members in the audience. George? No? Nothing? All right, then, any discussion? Nothing? Motion? Motion to adjourn by John Doherty, second by Paul Malorani. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye? Unanimous. All right,
Thank you.
have a good night, thank you.
Thank you.